Hi, thank you for joining this A Twist of Fate Bridging the Gap presentation. Today we're going to be talking about IEP development and best practices. Regardless of age, preparing for an IEP meeting can be overwhelming. There are so many new terms to learn. It can make it challenging to learn what services are available, how to ask for those services, and when it's the right time to ask. With this presentation, our goal is that you will get a better understanding of the IEP process and the IEP team, learn best practices for IEP development. The first thing we want to do is differentiate between a 504 plan and an IEP, which is what we're going to be talking about today. This is one of my favorite links that gives some great information about that difference. I know you won't be able to copy and paste that, but if you want, I'll take just a second and you can write that down. A 504 plan is a blueprint or a plan for how the school will provide support and remove barriers for a student with a disability. An IEP plan, on the other hand, it is a blueprint or a plan for the special education experience of a child with a disability across all school environments. As a parent, I've had one of my children on a 504 plan for medical support, and one of my children is currently receiving special services. We've developed a robust plan about how she will be supported and how she will learn at school through her IEP. So right now, we'll just focus on IEP development. And I will share with you one of my favorite quotes when we're talking about IEP. Each IEP needs to take your child one step closer to the future they want. Charmaine Thanger. It takes a lot of planning and some intentional thinking to create an IEP that's going to take your child to the future that they and you envision for them. So the special education process, there is a lot to it, and I'm not going to focus very deep on the details because we have a lot of people watching from different states, different areas, and maybe even internationally that might want to learn more about how to develop a plan for their child. So this is just a really general overview. So the first thing you have is identification, child find, and that means either the school has identified a need for support and possible evaluation, or you are requesting as a parent to have your child evaluated. So then we have the full individual evaluation, which can be done in school, or you can have an outside evaluation completed. Then we have eligibility determination, and that determines whether your child qualifies for an IEP or related services. The next step would be to develop that plan, develop the IEP. And the last piece is where your child's going to be and putting that plan into place. Now, who qualifies for an IEP? To be eligible for an IEP, a student has to, 1, have one or more of the 13 conditions that are covered under IDEA, which includes learning disabilities, and 2, need services to thrive in school. So here are some fast facts about the IEP. IEPs are covered by special education law, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, often called IDEA. They're created for eligible kids who attend public school, which includes public charter schools. An IEP lays out the special education instruction, supports, and services a student needs to thrive in school. IEPs are part of pre-K to 12 public education. There are no IEPs in college, but eligible students often can still get accommodations through college disability services. Now, what's in an IEP? First of all, of course, the student's information, who the child is, their present level of performance, where they are now. So it will describe the child's current abilities, skills, challenges, and strengths. It may also discuss social skills and behavior. And then we're going to have annual goals. These should consist of academic and functional skills that a child can reasonably accomplish during the school year. Each is broken down into shorter term objectives. So you might think of that like a report card that's broke down into 4 pieces. So an IEP might be broken down into shorter term objectives that we can meet. We'll then have the IEP also has progress reporting. It states how the IEP team will keep track of the child's progress toward annual goals. Services are included in the IEP. Those are what services the student will get and for how long. Any services outside of the school year, for instance, during the summer, we have extended school year options, transition planning for life after high school. It may include information about supplementary aids and services. It specifies what accommodations the child will get in school, like a seat at the front of the class. It also details any modifications, and we'll go through those a little deeper later. These are changes to what's expected of the child, like less homework, for example. The section will also include information about any assistive technology the student may need. Participation. This will include how and to what extent the child will be included in general education classes and other activities, including state tests. And then finally, you have consent. It's where the team agrees to the plan. And we'll talk about the IEP team in just a few minutes. Now, looking back at what's in an IEP, when we talk about services, what service the student will get and for how long, any services outside of the school year, and transition planning. IDEA is very clear on what those related services are. That includes speech, language, pathology, audiology, interpreting services, psychological services, physical and occupational therapy, recreation, including therapeutic recreation, early identification and assessment of disabilities, counseling service, including rehabilitation counseling, orientation and mobility services, medical services for diagnostic or evaluation purposes, school health services and school nurse services, and social work services in school. I always like to highlight this because sometimes parents may not know what related services are possibilities. This list is not a complete list. There are many others that schools routinely make available under the umbrella of related services. It's a great discussion to have with your district or in your area to determine what other services may be beneficial to your child that the school will provide. The IEP decides which related services the student needs, and those are listed in the IEP. There are also supplementary aids and services. One of the most powerful types of supports available to children with disabilities are the other kinds of supports or services, other than special education and related services, that a child needs to be educated with their peers in general education to the maximum extent appropriate. Some examples of these additional services and supports, also called supplementary aids and services in IDA, are adaptive equipment, assistive technology, peer tutors, one-on-one aids, and adaptive materials. The IEP team, which includes the parents, is the group that decides which supplementary aids and services a child needs to support his or her access to and participate in the school environment. The IEP team must really work together to be successful. Team members talk about the child's needs, the curriculum, school routine, and openly explore all options to make sure the right supports for the specific child are included. Sometimes that includes kind of thinking outside of the box. When we talk about funding, is not always there for public schools. Sometimes we have to get creative. So these conversations are really important, talking with the team and making those decisions. So this is actually a great segue to who is on the IEP team. So here's a visual I've created. It just kind of gives you an idea of who all is included on the team. First, the parent. By law, you have a say in your child's education. You have valuable knowledge about your child's strengths, struggles, and goals. You are your child's first teacher. You can really describe what is and isn't working and what works best for your child. We have the general education teacher. This person knows how your child is doing in the classroom and in the general education curriculum. And then, of course, we have a special education teacher who offers input on what your child needs to thrive in the general education classroom. We're always going to have a school district representative. that may be a different person. It's always going to be a decision maker, someone who can say yes to services that you are requesting. So perhaps it would be a principal, a vice principal, or someone else in the district. And then additional team members. We might have a translator. We may have all of the those who provide services to your child or who will provide services to your child if this is your first meeting. You always can invite someone to come with you. You can have an advocate. You can have just someone there to support you. It may be a family member. It may be a friend. And finally, and last but not least, because this is the most important person on the team, it's going to be your child. Your child will be included on the team at age 16 by law. Kids can self-advocate and help develop their transition plans. They can learn to lead IEP meetings if that's something that they want to do. I saw some really cool ideas when we talk about thinking outside of the box. A student who had created a video, a life in the day of the student's name. So they had gone a full day of videoing their life, and it just gives the team a little more information about them, and they were able to present that as they were leading the meeting. So it's really important to think about ways that you will be including your child on the team. So when we talk about building an IEP, sometimes it can be hard for educational professionals to understand that we're navigating a whole medical world on top of an educational world. And it can be a lot of information to digest and process. As parents, it's important to ask questions, to know what programs and options there are to choose from when considering services and placement, and to really take our time in processing assessment data. Although it can be hard to be vulnerable, asking those questions is really important. So assessments give us a lot of information. They will tell us what placement is appropriate, what programs are going to meet the needs of the type of placement we're looking for, and what type of goals that we want to work on. And just remember, this is ever changing, just like our students. Sometimes there's a priority need or a medical need that can be an obstacle to access. Every year this may shift. So this is something that will really change what we want to work on, where we want to be. So assessments are important so that we can kind of understand where we are and get some ideas about where we want to go. So talking about the IEP, of course, it will cover placement, where your child's going to be, programs, how they'll be involved, curriculum, what they'll learn, and specific goals, what they'll learn on. So we really want to talk about and think about, though, during and post-pandemic, we should really have a plan for each of the following types of educational models. A traditional in-person, remote learning, or a hybrid where we're doing a mixture of the two. The Department of Education has been really clear that students remain fully covered under IDA during the pandemic. Special education in the COVID-19 era requires additional planning and brainstorming. We want to be thinking through services that your child receives or we want them to be receiving, and collaborate with the team on how we can best implement those in each of those three models. As a family, we want to be thinking through things like virtual IEP meetings, access to technology, whether that is a device or whether that is internet. So there's a lot more to go into planning when we're talking about COVID-19. So we really want to create plans that cover all of those three models. Services, I know as a parent, receiving services last year was really difficult because those services were not created with remote learning in mind. They're created for person to person, they're relationship based. Those are the kind of modes where our kids really thrive. So we have to think of ways that we can kind of continue to make progress on those things in a remote or hybrid situation. There's a lot of information out there. I put a link at the bottom. So it's just a Rights Law link, and it has a lot of information about COVID. So a lot of the requirements, information from the Department of Education, information from the CDC, and Rights Law has a lot. It's going to be able to also give you a lot of ideas on how we can make remote and hybrid work. For our daughter, remote was really difficult. So when we are remote working, we're not working on a device. We're picking up packets of paperwork. When we are doing something remote, we're thinking through things like using a stopwatch to give her an idea of when it was going to end, so that she didn't think she was just on this endless remote learning call and it was just never going to stop. So there are a lot of extra things to think through when we think about COVID-19, remote learning, hybrid learning. So now we'll move on to what are accommodations. Accommodations are supports and services provided to help a student access the general education curriculum and validly demonstrate learning. So, of course, I put a link here that I think has really some great accommodations, but be warned, the list is really long. And that's because when we think about accommodations, the possibilities really are endless. This is where the individualized part of IEP comes into play. But there are some things that we can consider. We can consider the environment, so environmental accommodations, maybe a quiet area to complete work or take a test. Preferential seating, which would mean, maybe sitting near the front or away from distraction, or in their area of preference. Maybe they prefer a left or right visual field. We can think about transitional accommodations, visual cues in hallways to guide the student to the next classroom or cafeteria. In a patient group I was in recently, I heard a great idea of using arrows as visual cues. So the school was taking red tape. They were putting arrows along, where the child was going to go, kind of to help guide her. But the interesting thing is they were using the red tape, and when they ran out of red tape, they used yellow tape on the last section. Unfortunately, due to the students' vision support needs, they couldn't see the yellow tape. And during a conversation with their parent, it was discovered. It's important. So this just really highlights it's important to review accommodations, talk with the team, check in with your child. There's lots of ways that we can get kind of feedback on how our accommodations are working. But we definitely, it's just important to review those, make changes where needed, because the student's not going to have the same support needs or accommodation needs in 5th grade that they might have in 12th grade. More accommodation areas that are great to consider are language-based accommodations. For example, a minimal use of open-ended statements or questions. The use of first, then cues. We've always found those really helpful. There are also many visual-based accommodations. Another example may be to use black marker pens to trace over directions and darken print for students with low vision. So those are all some good ideas. And this link has endless ideas, I think. But you can kind of search, because each of our students, whether they are, need supports for something like vision or something like behavior, every child is different. So, when you can kind of look at the list and find some ideas that may help work for you, or ideas that you can kind of grow and change into what will work for you. So next we'll talk about what are modifications. So they're different from accommodations. Modifications are changes to what your child is taught or expected to do in school. Modifications are not the same as accommodations, which are changes to how your child learns. So you might have some modifications that include the use of alternate books, pass or no pass grading options, reworded questions in simpler language, daily feedback to a student. So you can Google modifications that will kind of give you a list, just like we did with accommodations. But they are a little different, and it's good to know the difference between the two. So modifications are changes to what your child is taught or expected to do, and they're not the same as accommodations, which is how our children learn. So finally, I just put together some of my favorite tips and best practices. First of all, the most important thing we can do is exercise our right to participate in the process. We are valuable. We know our students better than anyone. Our feedback is valuable to create the best IEP and to set them up for success. And we often have a vision for our child's future, or we begin to hear to learn from our children what their vision is for the future. And that feedback is really valuable to be sure that we're on the right track. Always remember that you have a common purpose, your child. It can be hard, especially when we are asking for services or asking for support, so we're not immediately getting those. I always try to assume the positive. This team was put together with the common purpose. My daughter, she's the common purpose for us all and for all of the hard work that we do. So when we remember that, it kind of helps keep us on track. We always want to communicate openly and with respect. That can be hard, especially when emotions are flying. But the best way that we can collaborate as a team is to be sure we are communicating respectfully and communicate openly. I often reach out to the team when there's a change at home. Typically I use email because it can be hard for a teacher during their day, or any kind of other professional during their day, to get texts or calls. So we often use email, and we communicate a lot with our team. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I always tell this story because it just really highlights that we don't know what we don't know. When my daughter was 3, we received an invitation to an IEP meeting from public school, which we had transitioned from a local resource. And we went to the meeting. We had older daughters. When we were called to a meeting, that we didn't always know the terms. When we were called to a meeting, we went, and we trusted that the school was going to give us that information. They were going to have the best interest of our child. So we sat through a complete IEP meeting. And at the end of the IEP meeting, I'm crying because it's a lot about what, at least initially, what your child can't do, what milestones your child is not meeting. And I was so confused. And I remember I looked up at the end of the meeting and said, are we talking about special education? I still laugh because we've come a long way since then, but it's okay to ask questions, and to, even if they sound foolish, because I didn't know what we were talking about at the time. And so my question prompted a deeper conversation because we were just kind of confused about what was happening. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. Practice at home. This is one of my favorites because I have a real fear of speaking in front of people. And so practicing at home, especially before an IEP meeting, means getting all my ideas. For me, it means putting them on paper, but thinking through them and talking through them at home and practicing. So those are all, that's a great way that I don't lose track of what I'm talking about, because maybe my nerves are, or I'm nervous, or I'm feeling scared. So practicing at home for a lot of people is really a great tip. You want to make the most of your resources also. Kind of find your community. In every community, at least in the United States, there are resources. There may be a disability council. There may be a parent advocacy group. There may be other parents in your child's school who are great resources. So find those resources and make the most of those resources. And I've included my email on the last slide, which is coming next. If you want help in finding those resources, please don't hesitate to reach out. And so we also want to be open to new ideas. What is hard for me, at least as a parent, is when I'm my first, my child's first teacher, so I must know everything. But I'm not really, I don't know everything that's happening in the school environment on a day-to-day basis, on a minute-to-minute basis. So I'm always open to listening to what our teachers and support staff and therapists are saying and telling me. And it can be hard when you're being told something about your student or your child, and that's new that maybe you didn't know. But it's important to listen and to be open to new ideas. And we all learn together. So, they may learn new ideas from me. I may learn new ideas from them. And finally, we always want to celebrate achievements. So when we're meeting those milestones, when our goals are set up for our student to be successful, we always want to celebrate those and celebrate the team and encourage each other. And that's really been helpful to us along the way. We at ATOF really hope you enjoyed this presentation. It wasn't as in-depth as I would have liked to have gone, but we have a lot of people from different states and, laws, policies, those kind of things, guidelines will change from state to state. IDEA will not change, but how it's implemented in some states changes. So we can go into a lot of detail. Just remember to always think outside of the box. Keep expectations high. We always want to challenge team members to think creatively to help our child reach their full potential. And collaborate, tap into resources, and work collaboratively with your team. That will be one of the biggest things that you can do to have, set your child up for success. So again, my name is Sky Collins. I'm scollins@twistofate.org. And if I can answer any questions or assist in any way, let me know. Thank you.